To give you a little bit of background about me, I'm Shannon Winton. I'm the lead editor for Eyetooth Editing. I also founded Houston Independent Authors Writers Lunch as one of their programs. And just before we go too far, I want to make sure that you guys are aware, like I am a municipal liaison for NaNoWriMo, but we don't have like a commercial relationship. And the reason I say this is because there'll sometimes be people who will do promotions and will kind of act like NaNoWriMo is supporting that, even though NaNoWriMo maybe didn't know about them at the time. So I just wanted to make sure that, yeah, you know, as an individual, I'm an ML, but in no way or form, shape or form are you required to like give me money or anything like that. And I know that's a really weird thing to bring up, but if I hadn't had to do cease and desist for some people, it'd be like, you know, you're putting this in a way that's going to confuse individuals, I wouldn't bring it up. So just FYI. Not exactly that, but they'll say, oh, if you want to succeed at Nano, you know, do this, and they'll show all the NaNoWriMo branding, and it'll make it look like they're aligned, or that NaNoWriMo is saying, you know, hey, go hire this person or go do this. And I want to make sure that it's very clear that this is separate from the NaNoWriMo, you know, 503c nonprofit. Okay, so going on. One of the things that it's kind of weird because I'm going to send them to give you to the very back. I want you to make sure that you guys see my my list back here of books that you can read. One of the things that I want you to focus on is if you are doing Nano, they have a section called Resources for Authors. And so a lot of this information can actually be found inside of the resource material from that site. And so I did pull a lot of information from there. But I do have some resources outside of this that I think are great, especially if you're outlining before you do a Nano project. And so you're going to see my story can beat up your story. It's a lot like Save the Cat, but it's more interesting, a lot more engaging. Save the Cat itself is like the very first ever kind of, it's like the golden standard from 2011. It was a book written by a screenwriter to tell you how to plot your screenplays. And I also want you guys to be aware of Take Off Your Pants, which is outlining your book for faster, better writing. Libby Hawker wrote that, and she updated it about 4 years ago. And it's great for people who are coming from not an outlining background, if that makes sense. So if you're a pantser and you're trying to get better at not writing yourself into a corner, but then still go with the flow, her book is great. So all that being said, let's go ahead and get started. We're going to talk about 3 different outlining techniques today. Before we start, let me go ahead and explain what a pantser and a plotter are if you don't know what those terms are. Okay, so I'm so sorry, yeah. So a pantser is somebody who writes by the seat of their pants. When I first heard it, I hoped it just meant you wrote naked. That sounded like fun, but it's not what that is. It means that you don't have an outline. You may or may not have some basic ideas about your characters, or you may have like scenes in your head, but you don't have the whole plot, and you're not writing it out in such a way that you have like a bullet point where you're going to figure it out, or a book map, or your index cards, or anything like that. You just are like, okay, I'm going to write a book, now I'm sitting down and writing it. Generally speaking, people have an idea. It may not be a character yet. It might just be like, what if? But usually you'll have something. You'll at least know what genre you're writing in. A plotter is somebody who actually has an outline. It may not be a robust one, but they have a better idea of, this is the beginning, this is the middle, this is the end, or this is my character, these are their flaws, this is where we're going, this is how they change. And so it could be as simple as that, or it could be like a 38-page, it's actually a short story and they're going to expand it out outline. So most of the time they already have an idea of that, the storyline. So I'm going to go ahead and talk a little bit about the pros and cons of both in just a minute. Hello, everybody. Okay, so the pros for people who are pantsers, their passion drives their story. A lot of times there's a lot of innovation. They won't necessarily follow a formula the way some of the rest of us might. And so they can be truly innovative. But the cons are they can write themselves into a corner or they can lack cohesion in their story because they're just sort of moseying on and world building as they go. And so it doesn't feel like a full-on plot. The pros for the plotters is you've got a clear path before you begin, but sometimes, again, those plots can be formulaic, especially if you're following a specific guideline system. And then the cons is I've helped people a few times where they were like, oh, I'm so excited about the outline. We got this together. We did storyboarding and got them all ready. And then they're like, but I've already got the story in my head. I don't need to put it on paper. I'm bored with it now. I'm moving on to the next. So if you have to have a lot of shiny in your story to actually sit down and write it because your life is busy and this takes second fiddle, then you're going to have a harder time if you've got like a really in-depth outline. And then if you find that your characters are writing themselves, some people do, like they write and then their characters manifest in different ways than they planned. Well, you've already set them on a path and it's kind of rigid. And so it feels like you're fighting your characters to get them to go on that path. And you've got to figure out, does this actually make sense to send them this direction if the person they're developing into, if I'm not able to control them, like, will this make a good story? So those are things to think about. It sort of depends too on the kind of personality you have. Whether being a pantser or plotter is better for you. You guys probably can't see all these little terms down here for Save the Cat, but this is the Save the Cat wheel, and I don't know why they have it exactly like that, but it makes sense when you think about it, because Save the Cat is so prescriptive. It's very cool in that regard, because it'll tell you in the first 1% of your story, you have to introduce the main character, and then a want that they have that they'll realize is goes against their end goal by the end of the story. And then by like the 15% mark, you have to introduce the world, introduce the main conflict, introduced your antagonist. And then by the 30%, you have to have the first big battle. And I'm making up some of those numbers, but if you can read into it. So the opening image, you get 1% to show the character. Your setup goes up until about 9%. Your actual catalyst or your inciting incident has to happen at the 9% mark. They have to waver on their hero's journey for 1% after that. So it's super duper prescriptive when you get down to it. And so if you have a very analytical personality, it's great because you're like, okay, if I'm going to write a 16,000 word story, then I know in the first 600 words, I've got to do this. And then in the first 6,000 words, I have to accomplish this, this, and this. And so it's interesting, but what's that? It's really interesting. And again, especially for people who don't trust themselves, it's super helpful because it's like, okay, these are the confines in which I work. And sometimes for people that can make them more creative because there's these boundaries they've got to develop inside of versus all of existence possibly coming into play. So the pros of the Save the Cat, and I'm going over this really fast. If you do go check out that NaNoWriMo handbook, the 101, it has, I think, 5 or 6 pages devoted to the different steps. So you can go through there and you can actually create your outline from that if you're interested. Apologies. So the pros, it is extremely detailed, which means that there's less wiggle room and it can be helpful for people who have a harder time coming up with these devices on their own or figuring out when their beats are supposed to hit. It does provide some character growth and evolution because part of the beats that you have to hit, some of them are plot specific and some of them are character specific. And so it does provide you a little bit of room to figure out what their fatal flaws are ahead of time, what growth that they're going to have. The steps are really easy to follow. They do a good job of explaining to you what they mean for each of the different components. And it times the story beats to you, which in theory should mean that you have a good pacing. Like your pacing should be set by this. So again, if you've got like an 80,000 word story and you're going by their percentages, then when all these beats are supposed to hit. It should flow almost like a movie where you're going to be, in the first 30 minutes you have X, the second 30 minutes you have that, and then you have your big conflict in 20. It runs the same way, but inside of a novel form. The cons, it's super prescriptive, and a lot of us rebel. We don't like being told what to do and when to do it, and so if you're not a big fan of authority, or this isn't the kind of way that your brain works, then you're going to be rebelling against your own outline the whole time. It doesn't work for certain genres. It's very good for the hero's journey, but if you're using an alternate plot, if you're doing literary fiction, this may not be the way for you to do it. Or for Red over here, who doesn't write fiction at all, this is so unhelpful.
But some fiction tropes can work for nonfiction.
Yeah.
Because it creates drama. Because, like, it's nonfiction, but
yeah.
giving them highs and lows and
you
deciding
can,
where to put that thesis statement
yeah.
or revelation statement.
You can definitely have a secret spine for nonfiction, but this doesn't hit upon it the way.
Mighty balls isn't mighty.
Yeah, yeah. So this wouldn't be good for that. And then also I've noticed a lot of times you have people who are very math brained, and then you have people who are very creative, and there's not always an overlap. And so sitting there trying to do all the calculations for your particular story may not be your cup of tea. We're not, super math brain necessarily, and this requires you to be almost an engineer, analytical in the way you perceive and the way you think, for it to feel organic. I hope that makes sense. I see Tim laughing over here. So, y'all have any questions on Save the Cat?
I'm thinking of Sean.
You're thinking of Sean?
About the plotting?
No, no. Just rule of thumbs in general. Heuristically speaking.
Plotting,
Yeah.
Heuristically speaking,
Okay, and so we're going to move on to the plot dot. This is actually the hero's journey minus about 4 of the nitty gritty parts. So the hero's journey, if you guys aren't accustomed to it, oh God, Sean, what was his name? The guy that wrote.
Joseph Campbell.
Thank you, Joseph Campbell. He studied mythology throughout the world and realized that there were certain key elements to all hero myths. And so he put together this, it is a circle still, but it's the way things change throughout, the way the hero changes, and then how they get back to normalcy. And so the hero's journey is one of the main plots you're going to see in a lot of action movies, but you'll also see it in a weird way in romance movies, or in romance stories as well, because you go from a place of lacking to a place of where you are your own hero, and you've got to fight off whatever it is that's going to stop you from being in that relationship. And then most of the time, unless you're a no but maybe kind of story, you're going to win in the end. You're going to have that romance. And then of course, if you're in a series that can wiggle a little bit how that fits all together. But generally speaking, you're going to have a lack inside of the ordinary world. You're going to have some sort of inciting incident. You're going to have, they call it the point of no return, where you go on this journey, you're feeling like you're going to change your life. And then you're going to have a point where the main character hits a setback and they have to alter their course. And most of the time, that very first setback is because they're trying to return to whatever normalcy was. But then they have to continue on because another character is going to be imperiled if they don't. And then you're going to have another big battle, or another pinch point, is what they call it. But it's another, significant derailment for that hero. And then they have a final battle, and then they come back to what new normal is. Yes, sir.
Can I say this about the midpoint? Just as it says shift from victim to warrior. I've heard it described
Yeah,
differently.
yeah.
Goal changes, or
Yes.
they get what they want, and something else happens.
Well, they get what they want, and they usually realize, yeah, that's not what they need. So you can go in, and again, this is just sort of a basic overview of the outlines. Generally, you'll have your wants versus your needs, and so you establish the wants, and then around the midpoint or the 3/4 section, you'll realize the person will get that one and realize that it's truly sour. Say they wanted to be president, but they had to kill a bunch of people to do it, and they find out that was what their underlings did, or they want to have a normal life, but doing so means living underneath this totalitarian dictatorship. So they have to, their actual need is to overthrow it, or perhaps they want to get back with the good ex-husband that they wronged, and by this point, somewhere in between these two spots, they realize that they're actually an awful human being, and the person they should be with is the rugged cowboy over here that presents a lot of other problems too, but is really the best person. So,
romance?
yeah.
It's an oxymoron.
What's that?
Good ex-husband.
Well, you know what I mean. Yeah. I know. I'm trying to make sure that you can see it.
We've regretted it ever since.
But you understand, there's a thing the person thinks that they want. They can't just be 100% happy. They have to be aspiring towards something. And they'll realize somewhere during this hero's journey that thing they aspire to, that thing that they want to get, is actually it's poisoned in some way. It's rancid. And so the thing that they need to do is often the thing they did not want to do at the very beginning but got pulled into. And by the end of it, they've decided to own that, and they're going to succeed or they're not, again, depending on what kind of story you write. So if you go back and look at Lolita, all the things that, was it Herbert or Humpert wanted to do are truly awful. But by the end of it, he does have this bizarre kind of understanding of what a terrible human being he is. So he succeeds at nothing, but it's still an interesting story and it still fits the hero's journey. So again, this is very similar to Save the Cat, except it's not quite as prescriptive. And if you're going through the prose, I mean, it's good for both internal and external struggles, but it doesn't work for the same reason that the other one didn't work, like the Save the Cat didn't work, because it doesn't give a lot of room for you to grow your character outside of your outline. If they seem like when you go to write them, they want to manifest as a different kind of person, you've already stuck them on this journey. And so you'd have to revise your whole outline to get them to fit, or to get the story to fit them. It is more structure and better setup than some other options you have out there for outlines. But again, it's the hero's journey. So if you're writing literary fiction, where perhaps the whole goal isn't to get them to success or failure, the goal is for your reader to learn something new about the universe. This may not, it's not going to match what you're trying to do, because it's not a plot. This is very plot driven, whereas that's very character and, mysteries of the universe driven. And it does have character development. It has intrinsic chapter beats for the major plot points. I mean, you're going to end at a certain point because it's on that plot dot, or you're going to have that inside of specific chapters, and you can't leave some of those things out. But again, it may be too structured if you're not interested in somebody telling you how to do it or what to do, or if you get bored once you plan things out. This may not be for you. And then for other people, because they have that sense of, maybe I'm not doing it right, oh, I've got to redo my first chapter, I've got to do all this other stuff, it may not be structured enough, and they may be better off with the Save the Cat. Okay, and the last thing I'm going to talk about, and I'll try to go through this a little bit quick because we got started so late, is the plot roller coaster. This is really good for people who don't like outlining. It's also really good for new writers of any age. It's one of those things that I think they teach this in school now. I know I have seen it with a different name on my fifth graders' his stuff. And that's not to say that you shouldn't use it as an adult. It's just an easy way to think about what a story is composed of compared to these like 15, 20, 30 step processes. And so what it basically says is you're going to have a setup of some kind with rising action. You're going to have, you're going to hit the top of that ramp for the roller coaster where your climax is, and then whoosh, it's going to go down real fast. That's your falling action, and then you'll have a resolution. So the preparation for that big drop or the climax, and then boom, it's over. So that's why they call it the roller coaster. But it's kind of cool because it's only 5 things. So you're going to have a setup. You'll have a character type. They're going to, have some sort of rising action. You may summarize that. What your climax is, and then what the kind of person they're going to be in at the end, or where the world's going to be. And so one of the things that I suggest doing if you're interested in this is do one for the character development, and then do one for the actual plot. Because if you define who your character is first, for many people, especially if they're doing a character-driven story, the plot follows that character change. So if you have somebody who is I'm going to go with romance again. He's an asshole billionaire. He's this asshole billionaire, and that he's going to make some odd decisions, or he's going to have to, be handed a circumstance that he doesn't know how to handle, and our heroine, the romantic interest, is going to show him a difference in thought processes, and he's going to turn into a much better human being because of her. That's all character. And that's the basic plot to a lot of billionaire romances, is that you got your bad boy with lots of money you've got all this fun stuff going on in his life, but it also shows some of the dirtier parts, and then they become a better person through love. So you would follow them to, your climax. Your climax is the point where they have to make or break. They would be sacrificing everything else in their life, usually for love. And then at the closing action, it's the, I've got you, like happy togetherness. Or, I like red. You're laughing at me. Better than not being happy together. You look like you're, do you have a question? Do you have a question? You look like you're confused.
No, I'm not confused.
Oh, okay.
I was thinking
You're thinking what? Mr. Gray. 50 Shades of Grey falls into that one. It's the outlier because I'll just say it's an outlier, but I think the very first book, it actually does follow that roller coaster, because even though they're doing a lot of BDSM stuff, and then the girl is the one that has more, if I remember correctly, she's richer than he is, right? Yay day. No?
yeah, he's a billionaire.
Oh, he's the billionaire. Okay. I apologize.
She's a student.
She's a student.
Graduating.
Way off. All right. So from what little I remember, he's doing all these things, but she changes his personality throughout this BDSM process, and kind of fighting him and making him question what he's doing, although enjoying it the whole time. And then he has to make a dramatic change in his life, and then I think they get married, right? Yeah. So it does follow that same thing. So you're going to have these little divots on the way up to that climax, but for the most part, you know where they're starting, you know where they're going to end, and then you can start thinking about how you get them there. And it's less prescriptive, again, than these other two options, while still giving you room to grow that character to play around with them. That being said, if you only have character, then it's a lot harder to maintain the momentum and pacing when you start to go in to write your story. So if you have an idea of how you're going to get them to change, you might do one plot roller coaster at the top of your page, and then for the character change themselves, and then what you're going to do that's specific to their life to get them there. So again, if they've got to choose either to make this investment with this other company that will cause the love interest to be deported, then they might lose a lot of money if they don't. That might be your final climax, is them, helping the feds get rid of their other business partner and possibly bankrupting themselves so that they can save their love interest. So you would want to know where that character is going first, but then you would figure out, how to get them there. And that's just an example. I'm not saying that's the story you must write, but it's just an idea. Okay, this is where they are. This is where they're going, and then the 1, 2, 3 of how to get them there. And so again, for people who aren't super duper happy about outlining in the first place, or who think that this is just a big complicated process they don't want to get into, the roller coaster has 5 steps. And it's good and bad because it isn't prescriptive, so you can still kind of go off the rails with your plot and with your pacing, but at the same time, it's much less of a time investment or a mental energy sink than some of the other outlining tools.
It seems like it
Yeah.
would be, I don't know if it's true, but it seems like it would be a shorter story.
You don't have a lot of the first act planned out, but as you go, you would fill it in. So you could do this for short stories, but it's also good with novels, but it doesn't, again, because it's not prescriptive, you're not showing those sort of zigzags that you would see in a normal outline. But it gives the author the opportunity to make them as they go. Okay, so I think I got that covered. Well, I've got a couple more things before we go. Oh, you've got to go. You've got to go.
I'm going to stay.
Okay. Okay. So there's a couple things to think about for determining the best route. And there are other things out there besides just these 3, but these are the ones that Nano kind of says, hey, these are the best ones. Do you like outlining? Does anybody here like making plans? Awesome. But Red, you apparently are a pantser for your nonfiction. So you have an idea of the topic that you're going to talk about, but actually getting yourself from the beginning to the end, you do that in the moment.
It evolves on a daily basis.
It evolves on a daily basis.
And even when I'm going to press, I may add a chapter at the very last second. Because I found something new that ought to be in this book, not the next one.
Gotcha. So, again, depending on if you really like outlining, if you have that project management brain where you can say, this is what I'm going to do, and then actually go do it, then you know a more prescriptive outline might be for you, because it means that you have to do less work in the moment during the actual writing process. Do you do well with setting a pace and keeping it? If you're the kind of person who maybe you have a checklist, but you don't want to necessarily say, I'm going to get everything done today. It's just the stuff I need to get done this week, and I'll do it when I can do it. You may not want the save the cat, because it's telling you exactly when you have to do something. The plot dots might be a little bit better for you. And if you prefer jumping into the story as you go, because that's what's driving you as a writer, that's helping you, that's the creative spark, you really don't want a really prescriptive outline, because it'll steal out the energy from your process. And then if you've had one of these methods fail you in the past, you can figure out why. So a lot of us want to go write a story, and we'll be really energetic, and then it doesn't work for one reason or another. And so if you've had some sort of failure in the past, failure is not failure, it's just a pivot point. But for me specifically, I loved pantsing for years and years and years, and I wrote a ton of the first half of books. I wrote like 6 or 7 first halves. Unfortunately, that doesn't really get you anywhere because you can't sell a first half. And if I try to take the first half of one book and tack it onto the first half of another book, people would realize it and they'd get mad at me. So I would love to pants, but I realized that didn't work for me. Whereas I've had friends, and I've also had clients that wanted this really robust outline, but that didn't work for them, because again, part of the joy of writing is telling that story to themselves. And if we've already done it just in bullet point form, then they're finished. They're going on to the next project. So if you've had something happen in the past where one of these things hasn't worked, kind of evaluate yourself and why, and see if something else will work better for you. All right, a couple of things to add, especially for you nanors. If any of you guys are doing NaNoWriMo, I would definitely suggest doing a reverse outline. This also works well for pantsers once you complete your first draft. And so have you guys heard of reverse outlining before? He has, because I've talked about it.
I know, I like both kinds though.
Reverse outlining is done once you've got your first draft, and what you do is you read your own book, and then you create an outline based upon it. So you would read the first chapter, and you would say, okay, what are the beats, or what are the elements that are in this chapter? So you may do it in bullet points, or you may do it as a summary, but you might say, I have this character, we'll call her Diane, and she has these overbearing parents, and she wants to be a warrior, but she's stuck being a farm girl. You might have established that in the first chapter. So you'd establish what you've already done. So if you have if you've already written the chapter, you would write down, after you reread your own work, what you established in that chapter, what the plot points were for that chapter. So it could either be a summary, or you can do it in bullet point format. But you would do it for every single chapter of your book, and you would, after you're done reading your outline, you could figure out, hey, I don't have a reason for this major plot point, or all of a sudden there's a shift over here, but I didn't really set it up. Is that mine or yours? It might be mine. Yeah, that is mine. Sorry, guys. So you would go through and figure out where your gaps are to help you write your second draft. So if you didn't establish that your main character also could fly, but then she starts flying in the 6th chapter and there's magic in this world, you'd be like, okay, that's what's missing in the first the first chapter. Because when I started writing this, I thought I was writing one thing, and then I realized I was writing fantasy. But you would figure out again where those gaps are, or if it seems to you like there's anything missing as far as the character motivation, or if something needs to be inside of the world for something to make sense that wasn't inside of the first iteration, you can see those things as you go through and reread them. And so whenever you have a major plot point inside of the story, you can tell from looking at your previous ones if you picked up on the background information that needed to be there for that to make sense. And so, yeah, that helps you do your redraft. And then last but not least, especially since you guys are writing, a book in a month, don't forget Mamet's corollary. It's like my favorite thing in the world. For every scene or every chapter, depending on how you're writing, you want to make sure that it's very clear to the audience, the people who are involved in whatever's going on, who wants what are their motivations essentially, and then why is this important now? We're all crazy about toilet paper, because of coronavirus. So that doesn't make a lot of sense, but it kind of explains why now. Because if nothing was going on and you're at Costco and you see people fighting over toilet paper and like scratching each other's faces up, you'd be like, this is bizarre and I don't understand what's happening. But if you can convey to the reader or an audience why now, because people are desperate and stupid, then because they think they're going to get sick and need to hole up in their house and it's the end of times. So you need to explain the why now. And then what happens if this person doesn't get what they want? Because that tells you what the stakes are for that individual character. Well, I mean, if you know, I'm a regular human being, I just want toilet paper, I don't want to get in a fight, but I have no toilet paper at home and I don't get toilet paper, I mean, that sucks for everybody in my family for a number of reasons. So
She wants it, so I should. She must have something I got for.
well, I mean, like, you know, the
A
people
lot of that.
people going in that are regular shoppers, maybe who aren't going crazy but just ran out of toilet paper, are going to be against people who are you know, buying things because they're strained or stressed out and maybe aren't thinking clearly. But what happens if people don't get, you know, one of their necessities? So in every scene, in every part of your story, you want to make sure those three things are there, because if they're not there, if they're not very clearly on the page, I'm not saying tell, but if you're not showing the audience why this is happening, and who wants what, and again, and what happens if they don't, then they lose some of that sort of build of strain and stress and anxiety for the characters. You kind of lose their interest. They emotionally are a bit more distanced from the action at hand. So as you're writing, remember to keep that in there. Remember to clearly display your character motivations, and then what the end result is for them if they don't get what they're looking for. Does anybody have any questions? Absolutely.
The reverse outline, so each chapter has to have like a purpose. Is something to have a chapter that's just a setup or
Well, okay, so when you're writing that chapter and you do a reverse outline of it, you're going to look for more than just one thing. For you as the author, your goal for that chapter is to set something up, but the reader still wants to be interested in what's going on. So even if you're not addressing the main plot, if you're introducing new, you know, problems that are parts of the subplot, then you would still be able to say, okay, you know, I've got this going on, or, you know, perhaps all you're doing is trying to introduce the two characters and have that first tension, especially if you're writing a romance, because oftentimes when the love interests meet, there's a little bit of a fight. So perhaps, you know, you've got one character who has a bird and the other character accidentally lets it loose, and then they're fighting over how to catch the bird. Nothing giant changes in that chapter from a plot perspective if they catch the bird, but you've already introduced that tension, you've already introduced the characters' backgrounds, you've introduced how they interact with each other in a state of crisis, and like the love that one character has for their bird, or the problems that it presents if they lose that bird. So nothing may have, you know, from a plot perspective, changed, but it's still really interesting to the reader, because now they're reading this, you know, this interaction between these people as they try to catch a bird that might be clawing at them. There might be feathers going everywhere. So, like, again, plot change may not be great, but you've added so much stuff into it that's key interest to the reader, that it maintains itself. Does that make sense? So you would put all those things inside of your reverse outline when you go through. You'd be like, oh, okay, this and this and this, and these are the things that I've learned.
Let me say this about a chapter and a complete chapter, you know? A lot of times the reversal, you know, really works, where you look at the opening line or two, you look at the end line or two, and if emotion changes in that, sometimes it's a straight up reversal. They're happy in the beginning, they're sad at the end. Like, as a simple way to put it. But it can be more nuanced than that. Then you can tell that's a complete chapter. So sometimes chapters that, as you wrote them, can actually be put together so that you get that reversal, or chopped in half so that you get that reversal. But it's like you're not changing the words so much, but you're changing the structure of how they're put together, so that beginning and end of a area being a chapter has some sort of emotional change.
Purpose, right? Are you familiar with purpose? Why does it exist? What are you trying to do?
Yes. It's been a little while since I read it, but yeah.
He was in town about 3 weeks ago, and gave a presentation. A lot of what you're talking about here, he was saying successful movies or books have these things.
Yeah.
And he would pick up the movie and talk about the characters and the event as they went through. Why he picked a movie that wasn't good and why it didn't, because
They didn't have X, Y, and Z in there. Yeah.
And the formula that works if you want to make money in Hollywood, it has to have these. Yes, a movie can be good, but there's no guarantee. But if it has these, generally it is.
Right.
But for whatever reason, they don't learn.
Yeah. Well, or you know,
they
they.
could come up with this new thing that everybody will be happy with, and they aren't.
Sometimes things happen, especially in Hollywood, where you thought you filmed the movie a certain way, and then you realize you've got to piece things together. You'll have director changes, or the actors weren't, you know, they weren't doing what they're supposed to do. Things happen, but yeah. Yeah, but one of the things is, two of the people who I've mentioned, their books are written. They were originally written for screenwriters to follow that hero's journey. And so Save the Cat, one of the reasons it's so prescriptive is that guy's produced like a bazillion movies, and he's saying, hey, this is how you write a blockbuster. And so when you look at the hero's journey in myth, you look at the hero's journey in, you know, in television or into a visual media and in story, it's still the same story. It's just how it's presented. So you follow it as a writer the same way you might if you were, you know, if you're filming a movie. And it's one of those things that's lovely because it translates into the different mediums.
And if you're looking at SEAL team or SWAT, I mean, you have that natural progression because you want to make characters, so the setup isn't there. Versus, cleavers or whatever they have to do. Again, the setup wasn't required because you already knew the character.
Yeah. Yeah.
Sheldon.
Oh, like young Sheldon?
Yeah, young Sheldon. And again, there's the comedic part becomes more important than the actual action.
Right. And so that's, you know, there's wiggle, of course, inside, but
they're generally doing the roller coaster.
Yeah.
To a degree, but their highs and lows are comedic.
Yeah.
They're not emotional. They're emotional too.
Yeah. The skill is blending. So if you're throwing in specific elements, if you can make it work for either the character growth or the plot or for comedy, then you don't want to do just one thing. I mean, if it's only working for one, then it's really not working. You want to see if you can get all three of them at the same time.
Well, I went to that AWE conference.
Yeah, I never saw you, man.
And I found out I'm a creative nonfiction guy.
Okay.
Because I include events of my experiences within that book to bring highlight and understanding of certain things. I didn't realize that's what I was, but that's what I am.
Yeah, I could see that. I mean, it's definitely nonfiction, but it's creative nonfiction. Okay.
Anyway, I'm going to say 40% of the people didn't show up, the vendors, 40% of the audience didn't show up.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's kind of interesting. I did a quick look through everything, and then I went back and just took my time wandering around, chatting with people, get an idea, understand, get some contacts for presses and printing and whatever. I did sign up for one thing, and that was to have my books printed and sold in Southeast Asia. And I will send them my PDF file and my cover, and they will actually print it over there and mail it to people. And they have the catalog. So that one I thought would be worthwhile for me and all my clients. 60-40. Whatever they cost, whatever you sell it for, you get the 60, they get the 40.
Yeah. So you did all the production stuff. Before I shut down, were there any other questions about outlining? No? Okay. Well, thank you guys for being patient with my tech issues and having to park blocks away.